My name is Walter, and I am 57 years old, and I have lived long enough to understand that life never hits you from the front. It always comes from the side when you least expect it. When you are tired, when you are worn down, when you are simply trying to breathe. And that night, when I walked into that house filled with people who claimed to care about me, I felt something was off before anyone even spoke to me. The walls felt tighter than usual, like the house itself was holding its breath. The lights looked too bright, almost harsh, and the smell of some cheap, scented candle drifted toward me in a way that made my stomach twist. People were gathered around, talking, laughing, sipping drinks, but their eyes kept drifting toward me in little sharp glances that they tried to hide. I have known a lot of people in my life, and there is one thing I have learned. People who have something planned stare at you the way hunters watch. Dear, quiet, still, waiting. I stepped farther into the living room, and the sound of laughter rose all at once, like someone had turned up the volume. But the laughter felt wrong, forced, stiff, like they were performing the idea of a happy gathering instead of having one. I felt like I was intruding on a scene that had been rehearsed before I arrived. Even the way people greeted me felt too quick. A pat on the shoulder, a short smile, a nod that was over before it began. No warmth, no sincerity, just surface-level gestures that slid off me like cold water. I had been around long enough to recognize when affection had faded. And that night it felt like it had disappeared completely. My wife Janie moved toward me with that tight, polite smile she used when she wanted the world to believe everything was fine, even when it was not. She wrapped an arm around me, but her hand barely touched my back. It felt like she was hugging a stranger. Her voice was sweet when she told me happy birthday, but her eyes told the real story. Distance, annoyance, a feeling I had sensed for months but never wanted to accept. Beside her stood my stepdaughter Lila, who gave me the kind of look a person gives to something they are done with. A weary, quick glance, and then she turned away to talk to her friends who filled half the room. Young, loud people who barely knew my name and treated my home like it was their own little stage. I stood there, feeling out of place inside my own life. I felt like I was watching everything from the outside, like my spirit had stepped out of my body and was just observing while my physical self stood there, awkward and uncertain. Every conversation around me sounded fake. Every laugh sounded practiced. Even the music playing in the background felt mismatched, like someone had chosen it for a party of teenagers, not a man who had spent decades working himself into exhaustion for the comfort of the very people standing before him. I kept telling myself that I was that maybe I was tired from work, that maybe age was making me sensitive. But deep down, I knew this was not about age or mood. This was about people I loved planning something behind my back. Something that was not meant to make me smile. Something that was not meant to bring me happiness. Something that carried the kind of energy that crawls under your skin before you even know what it is. And then the moment came. Lila stepped forward holding a shiny silver gift bag. Its surface reflected the lights in small, uneven patches that made me squint. She smiled at me, but the smile was stretched too wide, like it had been pulled across her face instead of formed naturally. She said the gift was from all of them, and that she hoped I liked it. Her tone held a strange excitement. Not the excitement of giving someone something meaningful, but the excitement of someone waiting to witness a reaction. Waiting to see what would happen next. The room shifted as she handed me the bag. Conversations lowered. Heads turned. Even the people who had been pretending not to look at me now stared with open curiosity. I felt every pair of eyes on me, as if they were little spotlights pressing heat against my skin. My fingers tightened around the handles of the bag, and for a brief moment my heart slowed down almost painfully. A soft warning inside me whispered that nothing good was waiting for me inside that shiny package. Still I reached inside. The tissue paper crinkled under my hand, but the item inside was far too light. I lifted out a small box that weighed nothing. Absolutely nothing. It felt empty, hollow, a bad sign. I opened the lid, and there it was. A single folded note resting in the center, like the entire purpose of the night was sitting inside. That tiny square of paper, my pulse echoed in my ears. The note felt heavier than any object I had ever held, even though it was barely more than a scrap. I unfolded it slowly, and the room held its breath with me. The smell of that cheap scented candle filled my nose again and made me feel strangely disconnected from the world. My eyes scanned the words, short, blunt lines that were clearly written in a rush but with enough pressure to let me know. The writer was angry or excited or both, and as I read those words, everything inside me stopped. The note carried a message that was meant to cut me down, a message that was meant to humiliate me, a message meant to push me into reacting exactly the way they wanted. I felt the weight of years of loyalty, years of sacrifice, years of letting myself be the quiet, dependable man. All of that pressed against my ribs in one long, heavy wave, and then something inside me snapped, but not in the way they expected. Instead of breaking, I felt something unfold inside my chest, something warm, something steady, and before I knew it, I started laughing. A deep, rolling laugh that came from a place inside me that had been locked away for years. My laugh filled the room and shook the air, and for the first time that night, every single person looked genuinely shocked. Their eyes widened. Their faces stiffened. They did not expect strength. They expected collapse. I laughed because, in that moment, I finally saw the truth. I saw every small betrayal, every whispered conversation, every cold shoulder, every plan they had made without me. I saw the years I had wasted trying to please people who never intended to return even half of what I gave. I saw the truth of my life as clear as daylight, and that truth changed everything. I had spent most of my life being the dependable man, the man who worked long hours, the man who fixed everything that broke, the man who paid bills on time even when it meant I went without things I needed, the man who said yes when saying no could have saved my peace or my health or my sleep. My younger brother Mason used to joke that I had the patience of a saint and the backbone of a folding chair, and each time he said it, I forced a laugh, even though his words cut through me like a quiet blade. I pretended it did not bother me, but in truth it sat heavy in a place inside me that I did not know how to protect. I had been raised to keep the peace, to be steady, to be the one others leaned on. I carried the weight of everyone else so long that I forgot what it felt like to carry myself. People around me grew comfortable with it. My effort became their expectation. My sacrifices became their routine. They stopped noticing how much I gave because they believed I would always give more. My stepdaughter Leela was the perfect example of that. She had learned at a young age that if she pushed hard enough, I would give in. If she wanted a ride, I gave it. If she wanted money, I offered it. If she wanted help with something that was not my responsibility, I still stepped in. She asked and asked and asked while giving nothing back but attitude and judgment. Yet I tolerated it because I loved her mother Janie more than I ever loved myself. I convinced myself that patience was my duty, that being supportive was what made a family function. I kept telling myself it was kindness when in reality it was fear. Fear of disappointing someone. Fear of conflict. Fear of being seen as the man who finally stood up for himself. The year everything changed was the year my hardware shop began to struggle. The economy dipped and the foot traffic slowed and the weight of bills grew heavier on my shoulders. I took on a second job working nights at a warehouse to keep things afloat. I barely slept. I woke up with stiff hands that throbbed deep into my bones. My vision blurred a little more each day from exhaustion. My back ached as if I carried bricks instead of responsibilities. Still, I kept going because I believed hard work would solve everything. I believed things would improve if I pushed myself just a little more. But while I pushed myself until I felt hollow, Janie and Lila began drifting away from me. They whispered in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep. They shared looks across the room like silent secrets passing between them. They left rooms when I entered, as if my presence disrupted their world instead of belonging to it. The air inside the house grew tense and cold in a way that no heater could fix. I kept telling myself that stress was the reason, that their moods came from worry or pressure. But the unease grew louder each day like a warning siren. Inside my chest that I could no longer ignore. I would walk into the living room and find the two of them sitting together on the couch with their voices lowered quickly as soon as I stepped in. I would reach for Janie and she would step back slightly as if she did not want me to touch her. I would try to start conversations and get nothing but short, empty replies from both of them. Nights felt longer than days because the silence in my home felt heavier than the work I was doing outside of it. I felt like a stranger inside my own life, watching the people I loved drift away without any explanation. At first I thought it was something I had done wrong, something I had failed at, something I needed to fix. But as the days passed, I realized the distance had nothing to do with mistakes. It had to do with choices that were being made behind my back. One evening, I came home from my second job and heard the two of them talking in the kitchen with a softness in their voices that I had not heard in months. I stood outside the doorway listening, and the few words I caught made the hair on my arms rise. They were talking about plans that did not include me. They were talking about my future as if it was something they owned. I stepped back before they noticed me and sat in the dark living room staring at the blank wall while a cold wave spread through my chest. In that moment, I felt something shift. A small, quiet shift, but powerful enough to make me pay attention. I knew something was coming. Something I had not asked for. Something planned with intention. And the worst part was that I had no idea what it was or how long they had been preparing it. I only knew that the life I had spent years building was beginning to crack, and I had not even touched the first fracture. My birthday had never meant much to me. I never wanted parties or noise or crowds. A quiet meal at home always felt enough. Yet that year Janie pushed for a small gathering, even though her voice carried no real warmth when she brought it up. I should have listened to the unease that woke with me that morning, because the whole day felt strange. Janie moved around the house with a cold heaviness, like she was walking through a life she no longer wanted to share with me. Lila drifted past me again and again without a single glance. I felt like a stranger who had wandered into the wrong home. When guests began to arrive, I felt my heart drop. They were not people from my life. None of my friends were there. None of my co-workers. No one who knew me. Instead, the house filled with loud young faces who belonged to Lila and Janie. They walked in with careless energy and treated the place like a hangout spot rather than my home. They brushed past me without a single greeting or a nod. Some of them even walked around me as though I were a lamp or a chair placed in their way. Each moment made the air feel tighter. I felt myself shrinking back as if I were a shadow stretched thin against the wall. Every laugh felt sharp and empty. Every smile held a strange tightness, as though the entire room was pretending something none of them believed. I tried to stay polite because that was what I always did. I stood near the edge of the living room and tried to blend in while people spoke around me without seeing me. My birthday felt like a stage where I did not belong. I kept feeling a soft warning inside my chest. A faint pulse that told me something was coming. Something they had prepared long before this night. I could feel the truth circling me like a cold breeze that slipped between my ribs. Then it happened. Leela walked toward me with slow, careful steps. She held a shiny silver bag in both hands, and her face carried a sweet smile that felt painted on like a mask. Her eyes did not match the smile. They held something sharper, something that made the back of my neck tighten. She stopped in front of me and held out the bag with a little tilt of her head. Her voice was soft when she said, "This is from all of us. Hope you like it." It sounded rehearsed. It sounded like a line from a play she had practiced. The room grew quiet around me. People stopped their conversations and turned their eyes toward me with strange, expectant looks. My chest felt heavy as I reached for the bag. I could feel the weight of every single gaze pressing on my back. I told myself to stay calm, to breathe, to keep steady, even though the air felt thick and hard to pull in. I reached into the bag and touched the box inside. It felt wrong the moment my hand brushed it, too light, too hollow. A box that carried no real gift. A box meant for something else, a message, a moment, a blow they wanted me to feel. I pulled it out, and the laughter behind me softened in a way that felt almost chilling. I opened the lid and found only a single folded piece of paper resting inside like the heart of the entire night. My hands shook slightly as I picked up the note. The paper felt warm, like it had been held recently. I could almost imagine someone gripping it tightly while planning the exact effect it would have on me. The room stayed silent. No coughs, no whispers, no movement. Only the sound of my breath as I unfolded the paper with slow, careful fingers, while every part of me waited for the truth that would follow. When my eyes traced those first lines, something inside me went still, not like the calm before a storm, but like the silence after one when everything broken is finally visible in the daylight. The handwriting was rushed, arrogant, almost smug, like whoever wrote it believed their words carried the power of God himself. It said they were tired of carrying me, tired of pretending, tired of looking at a man who, in their eyes, had outlived his usefulness. It claimed I was dead weight, dragging Janie down, suffocating Leela's future, embarrassing them both with my small life, my simple dreams, my quiet ways. It said Janie didn't want a man who fixed leaky pipes and paid overdue bills. She wanted someone exciting, someone younger, someone who didn't come home exhausted with aching hands and a sore back. It said Leela deserved a real father figure, someone who could elevate her life, someone who didn't smell like sawdust and worn-out hope. And worst of all, it ended with the words that were meant to bury me right where I stood. "We've already made plans to move forward without you. You should consider stepping aside and letting us live." My vision blurred for a second, not from tears, but from the weight of every year I had poured into these people who now saw me as nothing more than a broken tool ready for the trash. I felt every long night at work, every sacrifice, every time I told myself love meant being patient, being kind, being forgiving even when it hurt. I felt every moment I swallowed my pride just to keep peace in a home that clearly never wanted it. And as the room stared at me waiting, expecting, almost hungry for me to crumble, something inside me shifted. It felt like a locked door opened in the back of my mind, and all the pain I had stuffed down for years came flooding out. Not as sorrow, but as clarity. I looked up from that note and saw every face in that room differently. The smirks weren't just smirks. The whispering earlier wasn't just whispering. The fake party, the strange guests. The way Janie couldn't even look me in the eye, it all snapped into place like puzzle pieces that had been scattered for years. And instead of my heart breaking like they wanted, something else happened, something none of them saw coming. A laugh slipped out of me. A real laugh. A deep, hollow, unexpected laugh that rose up through my chest like it had been waiting decades to breathe. At first it sounded foreign, even to my own ears. But then it grew louder and fuller until the whole room went stiff, eyes wide, bodies frozen mid. Janie's face drained of color, as if laughter was the last thing she expected from a man she had just tried to emotionally destroy. Leela uncrossed her arms, her confidence evaporating in an instant. Someone in the back whispered, "Is he okay?" But I couldn't stop, because in that moment, I realized the truth they had worked so hard to hide from me. The note wasn't written to inform me, it was written to intimidate me. It was their weapon, their shove, their final push meant to corner me into the role they had already assigned. But instead of bleeding, I felt lighter, like the chains I'd been dragging for years had quietly snapped. For the first time in a very long time, I felt the ground under my feet not as something I was sinking into, but something solid I could stand on. Their words didn't weaken me. They revealed them. They exposed everything they had been hiding, every plan, every lie, every secret conversation behind closed doors. And as my laughter faded into a steady breath, I folded the notes slowly, carefully, almost gently, knowing the real story was just beginning and that none of them were ready for the version of me they had accidentally awakened. The moment my laughter finally softened, the room shifted into a silence so heavy it felt like the walls were holding their breath, and for a few seconds all I could hear was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the uneven rhythm of my own breathing as the weight of years of bending, yielding, sacrificing finally lifted off my shoulders like some invisible burden I never asked to carry. I looked around the room slowly, and each face stared back at me with a stiffness that revealed everything they had been trying to hide. Behind fake smiles and forced cheer, the shock, the discomfort, the guilt, the sudden realization that their little plan had slipped right out of their hands the moment I chose to laugh instead of crumble. Their fear wasn't loud. It was quiet, trembling around the edges. The kind of fear people feel when the person they assumed would always stay small suddenly stands up tall. When I glanced at Janie, I watched her throat tighten as she swallowed hard, her eyes wide, her shoulders drawing in as if she wished she could fold herself into the background. She stepped toward me, trying to wear the mask of a confused wife, her voice wobbling as she pretended she didn't understand what was happening. But her eyes gave her away, darting around, searching for someone to save her performance. Lila, with her sharp tongue and endless confidence, jumped in like she always did, raising her chin, twisting her lips into a smirk that didn't quite land, trying to turn the entire ordeal into a joke. She spoke with that dismissive tone she had perfected over the years, claiming it was just humor, harmless, teasing, nothing serious, acting as though I was simply too sensitive to understand. But I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to defend myself. I didn't need to explain what I had already seen, already felt, already known in my bones for months leading up to this moment. The truth was right there between Ustik, undeniable. Impossible for them to hide now that it had been dragged into the open by their own hands. I didn't say much. I didn't have to. I folded the notes slowly, deliberately, the way you would fold something sacred or dangerous. Even though it was neither, it was just a confession they never meant for me to see. I placed it back in the box with a calmness that unsettled them more than any shouting ever could. And when I finally spoke, my voice was steady, almost too steady, as I said, "I understand everything now." That one sentence, 8 simple words, made half the people in the room tense. So suddenly, it was like the ground had shifted beneath their feet. I saw a woman in the corner glance toward the door as if she was considering running. I saw one of Leela's friends grab her drink with shaking fingers. And I saw Janie's face go pale, the color draining out like her secrets had been pulled straight through her skin. Without another word, I turned and walked toward the front door, the weight of their eyes burning into my back with a mix of confusion and panic. And when I stepped outside onto the porch, the night wrapped around me like something pure, something honest, something I hadn't felt in years. The cool air hit my face, sharp and refreshing, as though the world outside was welcoming me back to myself. Behind me, through the closed door, I heard the frantic rise of voices, whispers, at first, then hurried sentences, layered with fear, the kind of fear that comes when people realize the person they mistook for weak has finally stopped playing the part they assigned him. They had expected me to break. They had expected me to beg. They had expected me to fold, just like they said I would. Instead, I walked away from them with a strength I didn't even know I still possessed, leaving their fear louder than any laughter, louder than any accusation, louder than the entire party that no longer felt like it had anything to do with me at all. The days that followed moved in a slow, strange rhythm, like the world had shifted a little to the left, and I was the only one who felt it. It was quiet in a way that almost felt unnatural, a kind of quiet that made me feel the empty spaces in my house, the ones I never paid attention to before, the ones that now echoed back at me with every step I took. I walked through the halls, noticing how the air felt different, how the walls looked unfamiliar, how the place that used to feel like home now felt like a stage where everyone had forgotten their lines. Janie tried to pretend nothing had happened, acting like the birthday gathering was just another evening, acting like the note was nothing more than a misunderstood joke, acting like she had not watched me stand there reading the truth written in her own handwriting. She cooked meals she knew I liked, the kind she used to make when we first married, but she barely looked at me. Every time I entered a room, she suddenly had something to do, something to wipe, something to rearrange, as if standing still beside me would force her to face what she had done. Lila stayed out of my way, too, but she watched me like she was observing a stranger, waiting for me to explode or collapse or do anything that proved their plan had worked. I felt her eyes on me every time I walked past the living room, every time I opened the fridge, every time I tied my work boots by the back door. She was waiting for the old version of me, the one who swallowed every insult and pretended it tasted like respect. But that man was gone, and the silence I carried around me made her more nervous than any argument ever could. I kept moving with a calmness that surprised even me. I woke up early before the sun broke through the blinds, and instead of feeling tired or resentful, I felt something almost unfamiliar, something close to peaceful. I made my coffee, washed my face, left for work without saying much. At the shop, I fixed what needed fixing, stocked what needed stocking, cleaned my tools with slow, careful movements like I was polishing pieces of myself that had been forgotten. When customers talked to me, I listened without feeling drained. When my co-workers joked around, I laughed without feeling guilty. I could breathe again, and the quiet inside me felt more comfortable with each passing day. That silence, the one I carried like a shield, started to bother Janie and Lila. I could feel it in the way Janie hovered near the doorway when I came home, opening her mouth like she wanted to speak, but closing it again when she saw my steady expression. I could feel it in the way Lila's eyes darted around whenever I entered the room, searching for the old predictable reaction, the one she knew how to manipulate. People who rely on control fear silence more than anger because silence is unreadable. Silence is possibility. Silence is a sign that something is shifting in a way they cannot grasp. And that silence anchored itself inside me, calming me, strengthening me, reminding me that I had nothing left to fear from either of them. For the first time in years, I started seeing myself without the fog of responsibility clouding my view. I saw a man who had spent too long bending to other people's expectations. A man who had given his time, his money, his energy, his patience, while receiving scraps of appreciation in return. A man who had been taught that his value was measured by how much he could endure. But I was still here. I was still breathing, and I realized that note hadn't been the end of something. It was the beginning. It was the moment I understood that I had a choice. I didn't have to live inside a life that was built on manipulation disguised as love. I didn't have to keep shrinking so other people could feel big. That note had been meant to wound me, but instead it had snapped something inside. Me awake one evening as the sun was setting and the house was filled with that heavy orange glow that settles right before nightfall. I walked past the kitchen and heard Janie's voice. It trembled in a way I had never heard before. She was talking to Lila. She said she could not figure out what I was thinking. She said the way I was moving around the house so quietly scared her. She said it felt like I was planning something, and there was something almost desperate in her tone, as if she finally realized she was losing the control she had taken for granted. Lila tried to reassure her, but her voice carried that old sharpness, the one she used whenever she needed people to believe she knew more than she did. She told Janie not to worry. She said I was too soft to do anything. She said I would always give in. She said I needed them too much to ever walk away. Hearing that made something warm rise inside my chest. Not anger, but clarity. A slow, steady strength that felt like a quiet fire. They truly believed that after everything, after that note, after that party, after years of being treated like an afterthought, I would still stay the man they could push around whenever they wanted. They believed my loyalty was something they owned, something they could bend and twist like it was theirs by right. But in that moment I knew something they didn't. The man they were talking about no longer existed, and the one standing here now was finally ready to reclaim his own life. I did not chase revenge with noise or wild emotion. I did not raise my voice or demand answers or stand in the middle of the living room asking why they had turned me into a ghost inside my own home. I chose something slower and stronger, something that fit the new quiet inside me. I chose freedom, real freedom, the kind a man feels when he steps away from a life that has been draining him one silent day at a time. I started planning without a word, no anger, no warnings, no scenes. I began moving through the house like a man taking inventory of his own life. In the garage I opened old storage boxes that had been sitting in dust for years, and I found pieces of myself I had forgotten. Old bank folders, past statements, files I should have checked long ago but never did because I believed I lived among people who cared. I sat on a small wooden stool under the single yellow light bulb that flickered every now and then, and I opened envelope after envelope until a truth unfolded that made my stomach turn slow and heavy. As I sorted through the papers, I felt my heartbeat change pace, steady but powerful, almost like my body already knew what I was about to discover. It became clear that while I was working long days and nights, Janie and Lila had not only been drifting away from me, they had been taking from me. Not in small ways, but in ways that cut deep. Money that should have gone to bills had been moved. Payments I thought were handled had been left hanging until late fees piled up behind my back. My savings account, which I had built over years of careful steps, had been drained by someone who knew exactly how to access it. There was even a credit line opened under my name. Something I never approved. Something I never signed for. They were so sure I would never notice because they believed I was too tired and too trusting to ever look. They believed I would keep carrying the weight of their choices because that was who I had been. They thought I would always be the man who asked for nothing and gave everything. I gathered all the papers and made copies at the small print shop near my hardware store. I kept the copies sealed in a plain folder inside a locker at work. No one knew. No one suspected. Back at home, I moved through my days like nothing had changed. I drank my morning coffee. I cleaned my tools. I worked my shifts. I let Janie and Lila think the silence meant confusion or weakness or acceptance. But inside me, a new clarity was forming. A fire without flames. A strength without noise. I reached out to an old friend who had once helped me manage a small business loan years ago. He was a financial advisor with a sharp mind and a calm way of speaking that always made me feel grounded. When he looked through the papers, his eyes went wide and his breath caught in a way that told me everything before he even spoke. He told me that I had more than enough evidence to protect myself. He said I had been taken advantage of in ways that could have ruined me if I had waited any longer. He promised to help me rebuild what they had tried to damage. Together we opened new accounts in my name only. We created new passwords, new plans, new protections. With every step I felt more myself. Piece by piece I took my life back from the hands that had tried to control it. I did not rush. I did not panic. I did not slip into anger. I waited, calm, patient, steady in a way I had never felt before. I watched the days pass while I gathered quiet strength. They kept expecting the old version of me to return, the version that apologized for things I did not do, the version that kept the peace even when the house felt like a storm. But that man had stepped out the front door the night of my birthday and he never returned. I waited for the right moment. I waited for the day when walking away would not feel like a loss, but like a rebirth. And every sunrise drew that moment closer until I could almost feel the path opening right in front of me. That evening felt heavy from the moment the sun started sinking behind the trees outside the living room window. The house was quiet in a way that made every step echo like I was walking through a place that had already forgotten me. I called Janie and Lila into the living room, and the moment they entered, I could see the discomfort settle on both of their faces. They were not used to me asking for their attention. They were used to me nodding along, staying out of the way, carrying their moods like a burden on my back. Now they stood there stiff and cautious, as if they sensed that something had finally shifted out of their control. Janie sat down slowly, her hands twisting together over and over, while Leela crossed her arms, tight against her chest, like she was trying to shield herself from a storm she thought she could outsmart. I sat across from them and placed a simple folder on the coffee table. No anger in my voice, no shake in my hands, just a calm that scared them more than rage ever could. I told them that, for years, I had given more of myself than I ever should have. I told them I had worked until my hands ached, until my feet throbbed, until the weight of responsibility bent my back. I told them that I had loved them with a heart that never asked for anything other than honesty and a little respect. I looked at both of them and said a truth that had taken me far too long to see. Love without respect is nothing but slow destruction. It eats a person little by little until there is nothing left but a tired shell of who they used to be. And I was done letting that happen to me. I pushed the folder toward them. Inside was everything. Every hidden bill they had pretended did not exist. Every account that had been drained when I was out working late nights. Every document with a signature that was not mine. The truth sat between us on paper that suddenly felt heavier than stone. Lila unfolded the first page, and her face slowly drained of its usual sharp confidence. She did not have a single smart remark this time. Janie gasped and covered her mouth with both hands as if the sound of her own guilt might slip out. Neither of them spoke. Not for a long stretch of time that felt like the whole house was holding its breath. I told them I was done. My voice stayed steady, like it had finally found its rightful shape. I was not angry. I was not shouting. I was simply finished with being treated like I was replaceable. I told them I would be moving out in the morning and that everything they had been taking from me would no longer be available for them to reach for. I told them I had already spoken with someone who helped me protect my accounts and my future. I told them that their access to my finances was gone forever and that the life they built on my shoulders would no longer be supported by my effort. When I stood up, something powerful settled inside my chest, a strength I had not felt since I was a much younger man. For the first time in my entire life, I watched both of them sit there powerless. Their usual confidence gone, their usual control slipping through their fingers. Not because I raised a hand or shouted or demanded anything, but because I took away the one thing they never expected me to take. My permission for them to hurt me, my willingness to carry their weight, my silence that had always protected them. As I turned toward the hallway, I could feel the moment something invisible broke loose inside that house. Not loud, not dramatic, just final. A chapter closing itself with quiet certainty. A door in my life swinging open, showing me a path I had ignored for far too long. And for the first time, I felt free in a way I almost did not recognize. I packed slowly, carefully, almost ritualistically, as if every folded shirt and every document placed into the worn cardboard box was a small piece of my old life, being acknowledged for the last time before I set it down forever. There was no rush anymore, no tension in my body, no frantic scrambling as if I were running from a fire. Instead, everything inside me moved with a strange, calm gravity, the kind of calm that only comes after a long stretch of hurting when a person finally says, "Enough." I took only what belonged to me, my clothes, my tools, the paperwork I needed, and the few possessions that had sentimental weight, the ones that had stayed untouched by disappointment or betrayal. I left behind anything that carried the smell of sacrifice or the fingerprints of people who had taken me for granted. The house was still quiet when I stepped outside at dawn, and the sky had that early, washed-out blue that looked like someone had pressed a soft cloth over the horizon. The air felt lighter than it had in years, almost thinner, almost new, and a small breeze pushed across the yard like it had been waiting for me to finally step toward something different. Janie stood on the porch watching me with red eyes, not the kind that come from regret, but the kind that come from fear of losing a steady source of comfort. She didn't apologize, not even in a small way. She just wrapped her arms around herself like the cold morning wind had climbed under her skin. Lila didn't come out at all, because facing me would have meant facing everything she had done and everything she had let happen. And people like her rarely look directly at the consequences they built with their own hands. I lifted the last box into my truck, and the hollow thump it made when it landed felt like the closing of a chapter, final and absolute. Janie asked me where I was going, her voice small and trembling, and I told her simply that I was going to start over, that I was choosing a life where I didn't have to beg for respect or carry more than my share of the weight. She asked if I would ever come back, and the strange thing was, I didn't even need to think. The answer had been living inside me for months. I told her that I had already left long before this morning, that my body might have been standing in that house, but my heart had walked out. The night they handed me that fake birthday gift and called it love. When I got into my truck and turned the engine on, the sound didn't feel like a departure, it felt like liberation. As I drove down the road, watching the house shrink in my rearview mirror, I didn't feel sadness clawing at me or regret whispering in my ear. I felt something quieter, something steadier, something that had been waiting inside me for far too long. I felt freedom, earned freedom, the kind a man finds only when he finally chooses himself and no one else. It has been years since that morning when I drove away. Years since the silence of that dawn peeled away the last layer of the man I used to be. And yet I still keep that note, the one they thought would break me. The one they handed me with smiles that pretended to be warm but carried the weight of every unspoken betrayal. I do not keep it as a wound anymore, not as something that makes my chest tighten or my breath stop. Instead, I keep it as a quiet reminder of the day I finally understood that losing people who never valued me was not a loss at all, but the beginning of my own resurrection. Life grew slow and steady after that, like a plant pushing up through soil that has finally been given light. I rebuilt my business with hands that no longer trembled from exhaustion and a mind that no longer carried the fog of constant sacrifice. I made new friends, not the kind who sat around waiting for what I could give them, but the kind who showed up, the kind who asked how I was doing before asking for anything else. I learned to sit with myself in peace, to enjoy small moments I once ignored, the warmth of early morning coffee seeping into my palms, the soft hum of an old radio drifting through my workshop while I sanded down a broken chair, the quiet joy of fixing something that still had life left in it, even when others had thrown it away. Those moments became anchors, reminders that peace does not always arrive with noise or applause, often slips in quietly, settling into your life like it had been waiting for you to finally clear space for it. People sometimes ask how I walked away so calmly, how I managed to leave without shouting or breaking things or demanding the apologies I deserved. They ask how I looked to people I once loved in the eyes and chose myself instead of choosing to stay and crumble in the same old pattern. And every time I tell them the same truth. When someone tries to break you and you do not break when you survive, the blow that is meant to shatter your identities, something powerful awakens inside you. It is not anger, not revenge, not pride. It is clarity. It is a sharp, bright understanding that you no longer need to prove your worth to people who were blind to it from the beginning. You stop handing out explanations to people who never listened. You stop offering your heart to those who only ever valued your effort. You stop shrinking yourself to fit inside spaces that were never built with you in mind. Something inside you steps forward, tall and quiet, and says, "No more." And from that moment on, everything changes. So, if you ever find yourself standing in a moment like the one I faced that night, holding something cruel disguised as kindness, holding proof that the people you trusted never truly held you the way you held them, please remember this: sometimes the moment that feels like the end of your world is actually the beginning of your freedom. Sometimes the thing meant to destroy you is the thing that clears the path you were too loyal, too tired, or too afraid to carve for yourself. And sometimes losing people is simply life clearing your doorway so the right ones can walk in. That is how it was for me. That is how one fake birthday gift, wrapped in cheap paper and hollow intentions, became the final push that ended the life I thought I had and opened the door to the life I finally deserved, the life where I am whole, steady, unbroken, and free.